Hi and welcome. Fani Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, has said that we can expect indictments between July 11th and September 1st in the criminal conspiracy to overturn the election results in Georgia. In this video, I will tell you everything you need to know to be ready. First, I'll give you a timeline of the conspiracy itself. Then, I'll give you a timeline of the investigation. Okay, we'll start with the conspiracy to overturn the election results in Georgia. On November 4th, 2020, Donald Trump declared victory in Georgia before the ballots were counted. Also on November 4th, 2020, former Secretary of Energy in the Trump administration, Rick Perry, sent a text message to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows proposing an aggressive strategy to have state legislatures appoint alternate electors. So the idea behind what's been called the fake elector scheme was that if two slates of electors arrived on the day Congress was scheduled to certify the election, it would be up to Congress and Mike Pence to determine which electors were legitimate. Remember, the United States has an electoral college. We don't directly elect our president. Each state sends electors who have been determined by the voters. Okay, so Trump allies assumed that the Republican-held Congress and Pence would go along with this farce, that the Trump electors, these fake electors, were the real ones. The next day, on November 5th, 2020, Donald Trump Jr. sent a text message to Meadows proposing that the Republican-controlled state assemblies step in and put forward separate slates of Trump electors. On December 3rd, the Republican-dominated Georgia State Senate began conducting hearings following persistent accusations from Trump supporters that Georgia's election was manipulated. Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, appeared before Georgia state legislative committees and put forward lies about the election. Also in early December, Trump ally John Eastman reached out to sympathetic state legislators in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, urging them to decertify Biden electors and certify alternate Trump electors. Then, on December 6th, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp refused to go along with this fake elector scheme. On December 14th, fake electors in swing states, including Georgia, sent certified letters to Congress claiming that Trump won their states and they were the true electors. Then, on January 2nd, 2021, Trump made his famous call to Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger, asking him to find the votes that he needed to win. On January 7th, the voting system in a Georgia election office was breached by Trump allies, including one of the Georgia fake electors, Kathy Latham, who was a former GOP chairwoman of Coffee County. Forensic experts paid for by a nonprofit run by pro-Trump lawyer Sidney Powell copied virtually every component of the voting system. On January 12th, Bobby Christine, recently named as acting U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, said there's just nothing to the various Trump-supported fraud claims that the office was investigating. Okay, so that's what happened in the Georgia scheme. Now, here's the timeline of Fani Willis's investigation. On January 1st, 2021, she was sworn in as Fulton County District Attorney. Fulton County includes Atlanta, Georgia. On February 10th, 2021, she announced that she is launching a criminal investigation into attempts by Trump and his allies to overturn the election results in Georgia. On January 20th, 2022, she requested a special grand jury to help with the investigation because a significant number of witnesses and prospective witnesses refused to cooperate with the investigation without a subpoena. At least 30 people had refused to testify without a subpoena, including Raffensperger. Now, here's what I want you to note. There was a one-year gap. So on February 10th, 2021, she announced that she's starting an investigation. There was basically no news for a year. And then on January 20th, almost a year later, 11 months later, she requested a special grand jury. If you listen to my FAQs about the DOJ investigation, you know there was a fuss from some people that, quote, nothing happened for a year. Obviously, things are happening before there's a grand jury. When there's a gap for a year before there's a grand jury, it doesn't mean the prosecutors were sitting around playing tiddlywinks. Fani Willis was busy. She was gathering the evidence that she could before she needed grand jury subpoenas to get farther. Okay, so on May 2nd, 2022, this took several months, George McBurney seats a special grand jury. So Georgia has special rules with grand juries and special grand juries. A special grand jury in Georgia doesn't issue indictments. What it does is helps investigate. So what the grand jury can do is issue subpoenas, force people to appear, get testimony, that sort of thing. Early in the summer of 2022, the grand jury issued subpoenas to top state officials, including Raffensperger senior aides, Attorney General Chris Carr, House Speaker David Ralston, and several other state legislators. The jurors also requested the appearance of the 16 alternate GOP electors, the 16 fake electors. On June 29, 2022, Republican members of the General Assembly, including Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan and former Senator William Ligon, challenged the subpoenas in court, arguing that they were immune from testifying due to legislative privilege. Judge McBurney ruled that they were required to testify, but there were certain categories of questions that prosecutors couldn't ask because of these constitutional privileges. So you see, these prosecutors have these barriers that they have to get over. People are claiming privilege. People don't want to talk, so they have to go to the judge and get rulings. This slows things down. On July 5th, 2022, the grand jury signed off on a summons for several confidants and former lawyers who live outside of Georgia, including Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, and Senator Lindsey Graham. On July 6th, Graham challenged the subpoena, arguing that the Constitution's speech or debate clause shielded him as a member of Congress from having to testify. On July 19th, 2022, just about a year ago, we learned that all 16 fake GOP electors were sent letters telling them that they were targets of the investigation. What does that mean? There are 3 categories of witnesses in a grand jury proceeding. A target has been linked to the crime with substantial evidence. They are likely to be named as criminal defendants. A witness has no criminal liability at the moment, but they have evidence that the grand jury needs. A subject is in between. There is some evidence, but not yet enough for a person to be considered a target. A subject could become a target or a mere witness. On July 18, 2022, Georgia U.S. Representative Jody Hyde challenged his grand jury subpoena. A federal judge later ruled that, as with Graham, he had to testify, but that there were certain subjects that prosecutors couldn't ask him due to legislative privilege. On July 20th, 2022, New York State Supreme Court Justice Thomas Farber ordered Giuliani to appear before the Fulton Special Grand Jury. He had been obviously refusing to appear. On August 15th, federal U.S. District Court Judge Lee Martin denied Graham's bid to quash his subpoena, ruling that Willis, quote, has shown extraordinary circumstances and a special need for Senator Graham's testimony. He announced that he was appealing this to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. On August 17th, Giuliani was informed that he was a target of the investigation. Afterward, he testified before the special grand jury for roughly 6 hours. No doubt what he was doing was trying to persuade the grand jury not to indict him. On August 17, 2022, after negotiations between Governor Brian Kemp and Willis's office broke down, Kemp filed a motion seeking to quash his subpoena. About 2 weeks later, the judge ruled that Kemp had to testify, but he could delay his testimony until after the November elections. This was in August. On August 25th, the grand jury issued summons seeking testimony from former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump campaign attorney Sidney Powell, his advisor Boris Epshteyn, Lynn Wood, and an Atlanta data services firm. On November 1st, 2022, the Supreme Court ruled that Lindsey Graham had to testify. On the 15th, Brian Kemp testified before the special grand jury. On November 15th, a judge ordered Michael Flynn to testify. On November 16th, former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson testified. She had a lot to say about what Mark Meadows knew. We know that from the congressional hearings about the January 6th attack. On November 17th, Mark Meadows appealed to the South Carolina Supreme Court in the hopes of getting out of testifying. Notice these guys don't want to go down there and testify, right? On November 22nd, 2022, Lindsey Graham finally testified before the Georgia grand jury. Okay, so on November 29th, Mark Meadows was ordered to testify. On December 20th, the special grand jury wrapped up its work. Then, on January 18th, the grand jury report was issued. It was in the hands of the prosecutors. A judge ordered the report kept sealed until after the charging decisions, so we don't know what was in that report. So Fani Willis, on January 24th, 2023, 2 years later, she said charging decisions were imminent. There have been a lot of jokes about what imminent means because it's July and there have not been any charging decisions. Okay, what comes next? Fani Willis is not bound by the recommendations in the special grand jury report, but following the recommendations isn't a bad idea because it could give her political cover. What she has to do if she wants to indict someone as a result of the investigation, she then has to present the case to a regular grand jury. Unlike the special grand jury, which was focused on the election inquiry, regular grand juries heard dozens and dozens of cases on all kinds of topics. So she would presumably present some evidence and testimony heard by the special grand jury and then use portions of the grand jury final report to bolster her argument if she wants this regular grand jury to issue indictments. All right, so on March 20th, we learned that Georgia prosecutors were considering obstruction charges and charges under Georgia's RICO statute. A RICO statute goes after racketeering or corrupt organizations. So on April 18th, we have some things going on with the attorney representing the fake electors. Basically, one attorney was representing all of the fake electors, and there were some conflicts because it seemed like some of the electors wanted to testify, wanted to cooperate, and this one lawyer was keeping them from doing it. Then, apparently, some of these fake electors were given immunity. What that means is if they testify honestly, they won't be charged. So this is a way of trying to get to the truth, trying to get people to speak. As I said at the beginning, Willis said that she would have charging decisions between July 11th and September 1st. Apparently, the reason she needed this extra time was to get that testimony from the immunized and cooperating fake electors. Her reason for giving the exact dates was so law enforcement could prepare extra security. When indictments are issued, check back and I'll walk you through them.